Hi, I'm Rex Sikes, author of Life on Your Terms, and you're watching my show, Create Your Best Life with Rex. My guests include some really brilliant people, great minds, who have tips and advice and suggestions and strategies and methods and principles and practices for you to transform your entire living experience and make it glorious beyond belief. So watch my show. Wow, you are going to love the show. I'm Rex Sikes, and my guest today is Mitzie Perdue. She's the widow of the late Frank Perdue. Her biography, Tough Man, Tender Chicken, Business and Life Lessons from Frank Perdue, reached number 5 in the Amazon rankings for business biographies. She's also the daughter of the co-founder of the Sheraton hotel chain. The Sheraton hotel chain and Perdue Farms both grew from two-man operations into companies that employed more than 20,000 people and operate in over 100 companies. So what are the secrets for how Ernst Henderson, Sheraton co-founder, her dad, and Frank Perdue achieved this success? Well, surprisingly, both men said the secret of the success was, you know what, I'm going to let Mitzie tell you that. All right?
Oh, perfect. I'd love to. Both men were, it's such a coincidence that both men would come up with the same answer to their success, but both men said that it was their employees at every level that made the success of their two companies. And I used to ask my father, as a child growing up, it was really clear to me that he was a super successful guy because we always traveled, in presidential suites. He owned 400 hotels. Wow. So, even, 10 or 12 years old, I knew that Daddy was, how about unusual for his success? And so I used to ask him how he did it. And he'd tell me stories. And like one of them, just a short one that might be useful to our listeners and viewers right now is, he said in negotiating, he worked hard to develop the following reputation, that in every negotiation, he'd always leave something on the table so that the other side would feel good about the negotiation. He never wanted to be a shark who was getting the last penny. And so, I asked him, why? Why not get the most? And he said, because in any individual negotiation, like, for example, he's buying a hotel, he doesn't make as much money as he could. But on the other hand, by having a reputation of being fair and generous, the best offers would come to him first. And he said one of the reasons that the Sheraton hotel chain grew was, when widows who might inherit a hotel or even a hotel chain, their lawyers would tell them to offer it to my father first because he'd treat them generously. And the overall strategy was, you don't get the best individual deals, but you get the offers of the best hotels and you get kind of the first chance at them. So it worked.
That is really a wonderful approach because you're putting the other people first. There's so much, especially in our current day, about destroy the competition or grab everything you can. It's a zero sum. If you don't, winner take all, and yet your father built an empire based on giving other people a win-win so that other people got something, felt good. And as a result, he got more business because people knew him to be a fair, generous, good person. I think this is a truly remarkable message that really has to be heard, especially in our day and age. And so I appreciate you for bringing that up.
Well, I'm eager to give a kind of PS to that story because we're kind of on the theme of what I learned as a child.
Yeah.
Another sort of part of our, family culture was I was forever asking him, how you did it. Why did you do this? Why did you do that? And one of the stories that he told me that, again, might be useful to our audience is, and this is on the question of how did he go from one hotel to 400? Right. He started in the 1930s at the height of the Great Depression. And this was a period where everybody was running away from real estate. Hotels were going bankrupt right and left. And so how could he make a success when others were going bankrupt? And here was his answer. He said, whenever he'd take over a hotel, and usually it was a hotel that was, put up for sale because of a distress sale, verging on bankruptcy. So he'd take over the hotel, and the first day that he owned the hotel, he would call all the employees into the hotel ballroom, and it might be 400 or even 800 people, and he would know that every one of them is pretty much scared to death that they're going to lose their job, because it was typical back then, if an enterprise was failing, you bring in new people. But Father took a different approach. He told me that the first words out of his mouth at these meetings were, "I'd like every one of you to stay in your job." And he said, the reason I want you to stay in your job is because I know that you know better than anybody else in the whole world how to do your job. And he said, I have a job in this, and that's to give you the resources and the encouragement to show the world just how good you can be.
Wow.
And he said, what we're going to do together is, and you'll see in the next few months, this is going to be the best served, most popular, most financially sound hotel in the city. And we are going to be an example to the rest of the city that things can turn around. And well, that's kind of part one of the story. But part two is, he told me that the next day, the employees would see just cavalcades of people coming into the hotel to refurbish it, like plumbers, electricians, decorators. And he said the employees, surely they'd be glad to see that the hotel was coming back to life. But what would be surprising for them? These workers, the plumbers, electricians, decorators, they didn't go to the areas that the paying public would see. No. They went to the places that only the employees would ever see, like the employee dining rooms, lockers, showers. He spent the first money always on areas that would be good for the morale of the employees.
Wow.
And so, of course, I asked him, why would you spend money when you're not going to get any money back? Why wouldn't you put it in the public rooms? And he said, it was a way of communicating to the employees how important they were. Cool?
That is so very cool. It is so, and it's desperately needed in this day and age. I maintain the theory that one of the reasons what we're seeing going on in the virus time and all the stuff that's going on is that, and our economic issues, is that the workers are the ones who have made the corporations rich. And they're the ones who need to be treated well, and they're not the ones who are getting bailed out or helped or uplifted. And what your father did and what you share is how important they are to not only his success, but their success and the success of the entire enterprise. And to keep everyone happy and well fed is what creates longevity in a relationship.
Well, he was famous for something that my husband was also famous for, which is if you started working for my father, you stayed with him for life.
Wow.
And it's pretty much the same thing with Frank Perdue, because they treated people well. And, another question that I asked my father, and we're circling back to this story of the first day
Sure.
that he takes possession of a hotel. I asked him, how did you motivate people to go the extra mile? Because you don't build the kind of success that he did without the employees all kind of owning it and being part of it and caring about the success. And he told me that, and this is in his world, I don't know if it applies to everybody else, but I'll share it. In his world, there were 3 ways that you could get people to do what you want. And 2 of them are bad and 1 of them was excellent. The first way, and we're into the bad part, he said, I could have used intimidation. I could have stood up in front of them in the ballroom on the stage, and I could have told them, shape up or you're fired. He said, you can get people to do what you want that way. You really can, but they'll do it grudgingly, and they'll do the absolute minimum, and they'll be resentful. So he thought intimidation just wasn't a good way. He said another way, which is also not good, but it's at least a little better. He said he could have used bribery. He could have stood up in front of them and said, hey guys, do a great job and there's a raise in it for you. Do a great job and there's a bonus in it for you. He said, what's wrong with that? And he didn't approve of it and didn't want to use that approach. With bribery, he said it's too transactional. People will work for the bribe rather than something bigger. So if bribery and intimidation aren't good ways, what's left? And he said inspiration. His motto was inspire, don't require. And he said a leader's job is to give people a better vision of themselves. And so his job was to have, say, the maid who's making beds or the bartender or the person waiting tables. That person wasn't tending bar or making beds or waiting tables. No, they're building the most popular, most successful hotel in the city. They were being an example to the rest of the city that things could turn around. And so that kind of give people a better vision of themselves, I think, was one of his secrets of success.
It is truly beautiful, and it's truly needed in this day and age. I mean, it's been needed all along, and not only in business, but for our families and our friends. The idea that you can treat them well, and you can inspire them and uplift them, you know, and encourage them in ways that many people don't. I mean, you know, it seems that the good guys I think there are more good guys in the world than there are bad guys, but it sounds like the bad guys, you know, the tough guys are kind of running the show right now, and getting this message out to people, for whether their companies are small or whether their companies are large, I think is critical. And you're doing such a marvelous job with your books and your efforts and your speaking. I mean, you do all the radio shows and podcasts, and you have your own TV show and all the articles you write and everything that you've done. This is truly inspiring.
Oh, thank you.
Well, but you were brought up in a culture. I mean, not every rich child is brought up in a culture. We were talking about, you know, Napoleon Hill said, out of the 520 people that I studied, many of their families were messes. The children were screwed up, or in fact, the people who he studied ended up either in jail, broke, committing suicide, or in a sanitarium or something. He said really only John Burroughs was the one person whose life seemed to be blessed, because he didn't just seek cash. He sought peace, and he added value to the people around him. And so your father and your late husband exemplified these practices of doing the best with what you have and encouraging other people to do that, and making everyone feel like a family, and building something bigger than themselves, and being co-creators in that, as opposed to being tiny little cogs or pieces or poorly paid, minions. You know, they took care of their people, and this is such an important message.
And they had some respect for them.
Pardon me?
And my father and my late husband had so much respect and appreciation for the people who worked with them. And, you know, I'd love to share a story about Frank, since I've been talking about my father, but Frank was...
I'd love it.
Well, he was at least as much a hero to me as my father was. Frank just had an incredible ability also to make people feel important. And I kind of feel that a lot of his management style, I mean, he was known as a tough man, but people loved him because he was fair and they knew that he cared. And there was one part that I had a role in, and I'm kind of proud of, and that is Frank and I married in 1988. And the first week of our marriage, I remember telling him, Frank, I think that we should entertain every single person who works for the company in our home.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Well, yeah, that he had kind of the same reaction you just did, that, you know, what? And then he answered, he said, no, there's 16,000 people, which there were at the time. And, you know, that's just way too many. And I kind of pretended that I didn't process that he was saying no. And so I said, I think we need to have them 100 at a time. And he said, no, that's way too many. And then I told him, and I bet we could get this together in the next 6 weeks. You know, we could build the kitchen, we could we could just make it happen in 6 weeks. No, that's not, way too soon. And initially he was totally resisting this idea, but as we talked about it, with him kind of saying, no, that's impossible, and me just barreling on, his attitude began to kind of change, where he started taking the idea seriously, because, and I can see why it would take a little bit of time to process the idea of doing this. But, in the space of a few minutes and going round to round, I could see that his attitude was changing to, maybe there's something to this. And then finally it was, I like it. And 6 weeks later, we began something that continued for the rest of his life, which was 17 years. Often as many as 3 times a month, we would have groups 100 at a time, and there'd be people who knew each other, because we knew that it would be maybe it might make you nervous to have dinner at the big boss's house, but if you were with the people that you regularly worked with, you'd have a higher comfort level. So it would have like the veterinarians, the accountants, the truckers, the administrative assistants, would have them in groups. And part of Frank's reason for doing this was, there's a quote from a psychologist from the 1900s. His name was William James. And William James said something that just resonated with Frank. And this may be the most useful thing that I share with people today, but the quote is, "The deepest principle of human nature is the craving for appreciation." So the reason Frank went along with the idea of having every single person who worked for the company over for dinner was, this was one more way of showing appreciation.
Oh, beautiful.
And at these dinners, they were buffet, and often Frank would stand behind the buffet table and wait on the people. And, isn't that just a beautiful way of showing that you're important and I appreciate you?
It is truly lovely. And to serve, is to be of service to others, is to elevate them and to give them recognition and appreciation. A lot of people will do more for recognition or appreciation than they sometimes will do for money. So this is, that William James, the quote, I'm sorry, from James is great. The
deepest principle of human nature is the craving for appreciation. And at these dinners, he did more than just provide them with food. He'd talk with every single person. And imagine you're a trucker or a sanitation worker or a vet or an auditor or whatever, to have the big boss of a 16,000 and eventually 20,000 organization talking to you and asking your opinions and paying attention to you. And then at the end of the evenings, he would tell them very frankly how the company was doing, what the problems were, what the opportunities were, what the successes were. So that I think that increases employee engagement if he considers you important enough to share what's really going on in the company. And then at the end of every evening, in different words, but he'd always say some version of, he'd look out over 100 people, the 100 people who were in our living room, and he'd tell them, "I know that the company wouldn't be what it is today without you. Thank you." Is that not as good as it gets?
That is really, truly awesome. That is incredible. And it is, you have to be secure in yourself in order to be willing to give other people the attention and the praise that they deserve for helping you accomplish what you want to accomplish. It comes from having a good heart and a wise mind.
I'm a writer by trade. And so as a writer, I'm always taking notes of stuff, and I used to, and doing my very best to observe. And some of the things that I observed about Frank Perdue, I believe that in almost any interaction, whether it was with, a sales meeting or a social interaction, he would talk 10% of the time and listen 90% of the time. And the advantage of that is he's learning a lot, but really listening to somebody makes them feel important. And he was just a master at that.
That's very true. That's very cool. Very, very awesome. Before we go any further, I want to point out to our audience today that they can learn more about you and get your books and your materials and check into your blog and all the different things that you offer at your website. So I'd like to share that. I also encourage people that will be in the description. They can click the links below in the description, but it is mitzieperdue.com, and it's MITZIPERDUE.com. And there you can go and you can get her books on Frank and the other books that you have. You've got at least 5 books there right now, don't you?
I haven't counted because in my life I've written 22, and I haven't checked recently how many are on the website.
Well, there you go. But or they can find you on Amazon, I assume, as well.
Yeah, the best way to get the books is to go to Amazon. And my most current book, which is most relevant to us today,
Yes.
is How to Be Up in Down Times. And I have a co-author with this, Mark Victor Hansen, who's the co-author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. And yeah, the privilege of my life is getting to write a book with Mark Victor Hansen. And the reviews I've been getting for it is like, for example, there's a woman from Taiwan whom I've never met, never heard of her. She ordered 200 copies because she wanted to give them to her friends. And then other people say it's just the book for the times we're living through.
That's awesome. That is so cool. Again, the title is
How to Be Up in Down Times. And it's 40 tips for getting through the pandemic and the financial stress, the emotional stress, the relationship stress. Mark Victor Hansen is possibly the most inspirational man alive today. And my background, I mentioned that I'm a writer, but I don't think I mentioned that I have a specialty within writing. I'm a science writer and a health writer. And that means I have almost 40 years of experience of interviewing some of the best minds around on ways of coping. And so this book was a way of sharing 40 years of experience of telling people how to be up and down times.
It's definitely a must read and a must get for the people watching the show. This is absolutely a good news for everybody who's viewing today. And I hope that the viewers, the watchers, the people who are doing will share this as well so that other people can meet you this way and find out about your wonderful works and how you encourage people through not only difficult times, but through all times with all the different works you've done.
Well, I'm loving hearing what you say. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's go back a little bit because both your dad, you share the story that your father was told by a guidance counselor he should go into science because he was not a people person. He should just work alone in a laboratory, and that he took that as a challenge to, go into the hotel business and end up with working with people every day of his life. So how did your dad and how did your husband, Frank, how did they begin? They came from nothing and created these empires. They started in small businesses as a 2-person endeavor or 1-person endeavor. How did they build? How did they launch? Because I know listeners are going to go, well, I'd love to create an empire. I'd just like to create a small business too, So how do they begin?
Well, in Father's case, as you mentioned, if you were like an outside observer and you had met him at 26, you would think that this is the absolute last person in the universe who could do a good job in the hospitality industry. But here's what happened and how he got good at it. And I think it's also a story of transcending his limitations, because I could even guess that he might have had Asperger's. And here's why I'm guessing that, although I don't know. When my father got engaged to my mother, and my mother is meeting her future mother-in-law for the first time, Grandmother Berta, my father's mother, Grandmother Berta told Mother, Molly, don't marry Ernest. He can never stick with anything. He can't hold a job. You're going to end up poor.
Oh, wow.
And Mother said, I don't care. I love him. And they married. But, what a wake-up call for a young man to have his own mother say that he couldn't stick with anything and that they were going to end up poor. Well, with this wake-up call, father went to whatever the equivalent of the Yellow Pages back in 1923 would have been. I don't know if they had Yellow Pages, but anyway, he found, in the equivalent of the Yellow Pages back then, he found a career guidance counselor. And this was in Boston, Massachusetts. And he spent an entire day with the guidance counselor, taking just rafts and rafts of tests, personality, just everything that you could learn about a person's head, with the idea that this would help him find a career that he could stick with. At the end of it, Johnson O'Connor, who was the head of this career guidance counseling company, told him, "Mr. Henderson, in my career, I've never come across anybody who had worse human relation skills than you."
Wow.
Wow! But I mean, that could surely explain why he couldn't stick with a job. And he told my father, "You're clearly a bright fellow. What you should do is arrange a career, possibly in science, because you're good at math and you've got that kind of mind. You could be a scientist as long as you were in a laboratory where you didn't have to interact with other people, and then you could go produce great scientific things." Well, father reasoned with I think just incredible insight that if he had such terrible human relation skills, getting along in life depends on getting along with other people, and maybe he better work on correcting this. And so for the rest of his life, he worked on learning what makes people tick. And the things that I observed myself, he took the Dale Carnegie public speaking course. He took the Dale Carnegie How to Win Friends and Influence People. He read that book. He told me he read it, How to Win Friends and Influence People. He told me he read that every 10 years as a refresher course. But he also took psychology courses. He took public speaking courses. He read books and magazine articles, and later on in life, he even made friends with some of the world's more famous psychologists at the time, B.F. Skinner, Eddie Bernays. These are people who, I think in the 1950s, were just at the top of their game, because it was a lifelong quest to understand other people. Since it didn't come naturally to him, he felt that he could learn it and practice it. And I think one of the biggest secrets of his success is, by the time he had bought his first hotel and he's standing up in front of his new employees, he had more insight than any of his competitors to the fact that he needed to reassure them or they wouldn't hear a word he said. I mean, it wasn't an accident that his first words were, "You keep your job," because he knew that they wouldn't hear when they're in so much pain and fear of, what's going to happen to me. So he addresses their pain point first. But he knew to do that. And he knew he was enough of an amateur psychologist to figure out that intimidation and bribery don't work, that inspiration is the way to go. His greatest defect, which is that he had no understanding of how human beings worked, that tremendous defect, by working on it, he flipped it around and became his greatest asset.
That is outstanding. It also speaks to the fact that any person starting with any deficit or any problem or any challenge or whatever you might want to consider it can overcome it. He took action. He looked. First off, he thought, I need to learn this. I need to do something different. If I suck so badly at this, I need to get better at it. And in doing so, he decided to change his life. I mean, that's a pretty stellar example of what each of us can do, regardless of what we face or our background or where we come from. And then he was smart enough to search it out, look it out. He took courses, he took classes, he read books, he probably had mentors or coaches or people who, stepped up. And then on top of all of that, he was smart enough, because this is where a lot of people, I think, miss the point. They gather all the information and then they do nothing with it. And he applied it. He put it into practice and into purposeful use in his daily life. And as a result, he went from being somebody who should have stayed hidden in a laboratory to the Sheraton hotel owner with thousands and thousands of employees who he then invites to his home so he can serve them with you and make them feel good. I mean, or your husband did that, but I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, the idea being just truly, truly a marvelous example of how any one of my viewers right now, any one of your book readers can change their life if they just apply themselves and start doing it.
Well, Frank had almost a similar story, which is he was a shy country boy. He was never in a school play. He didn't finish college. He grew up on Maryland's Eastern Shore in a very rural area. And how that man, and I would say that he was pretty much initially as shy as they make them, because when you come from a background where you don't interact with other people because it's totally rural, excuse me, sure. That man overcame his shyness to become, at least in the 1980s and the 1990s, he was known as kind of the master marketer of the world. He was an absolute icon for being out there in his advertisements. And the reason that Perdue Chicken is, how about globally known, right, is that a shy country boy trained himself to understand how advertising would work. And a quick story, becoming a marketing icon didn't just drop in his lap. With his chickens, he felt that his chickens were better than anybody else's because he fed them better. They were healthier. His genetics programs meant that they had meatier breasts. It was just, he had a premium brand. But he felt that, why would people pay for a premium brand if it hadn't been communicated to them why the chicken was better? And so with extreme logic, he figured out if for my brand to be a success, and by the way, at that point, commodities weren't branded. Nobody had ever branded a chicken before. Oh. But he felt that if he could tell people why his chickens are better, then they'd pay a premium, which meant that he could continue to afford to making his chickens better and better and better. And the really cool thing is he had no background in marketing or sales, and he was inherently a shy person. He went to New York. He spent 10 weeks with what I call a total immersion study of advertising. He joined, I think it's the National Association of Advertisers. There's some name for it, but he joined a professional organization for the sole purpose of accessing their library. And he began reading all the books on it. And then he'd read the magazines. And then he'd call up the people who had written the magazine articles to learn more. And then he made a grid of Manhattan in which he figured out how many butcher shops he could visit each day, how many radio stations, how many television stations, how many newspapers, and it talked with the head of advertising of each of those, so that by the end of his 10 weeks, he knew more about advertising. He knew what the people, the butchers in the grocery stores, he knew what the sales managers for the TV stations, he just knew more about advertising than any poultry man had ever known before. And he was able to put it together into an advertising campaign that catapulted his company from a little tiny regional company to one that became global. And he figured out how to do this, but to get there, he had to overcome extreme shyness, and he did it.
Wow. Yeah. Again, two very incredible examples of people overcoming whatever presenting obstacle or challenge they had in their life. And again, the taking of some form of action that allowed them to produce the results they want because they desired it, they wanted it, they worked to having it. And I think it demonstrates that their attitude propelled them forward in what they were able to accomplish, and then the rest is history. What the legacy of what they created and were able to accomplish is truly remarkable. And it's so good to be able to talk to you and hear right from the horse's mouth.
A chicken's mouth.
Chicken's mouth of, good point. Chicken's mouth. Their thinking process and what led them to their successes. This is truly wonderful.
But something else that I don't know how you grafted onto everybody else, but to my mind, both men had an extraordinary can-do attitude, because people were telling them it couldn't be done, but they had enough self-confidence just to go ahead and do it. Like in my father's case, when he was told that, stay in a laboratory, where do you get the self-confidence and the drive just to barrel through and learn and transform yourself? And then for Frank, a shy man, to become a marketing icon, it would have been so easy to be discouraged. I would love to know, what kind of magic thing gave them the attitude that I'm going to do this.
Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, actually, I'm totally open to ideas. It seems to me that they had little voices in their head that said, I can do this, I can do this.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, thank you. That's nice of you, Dad. Henry Ford, one of my favorite sayings is Henry Ford said, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're correct. It's what you think. And he also said, I never let what I can't do stand in my way of doing what I can do. So, when he was faced with challenges, he said, this is what I want done. Let's just do it. And he would expect it to be done. And I think that whether people haphazardly find it or they develop an approach to finding it, that everybody at some point faces a decision. It's kind of like you wake up in the morning, you decide, do I get out of bed or do I stay in bed? Do I leap into my day or do I drag my butt into my day? And if you're a person who drags their butt into their day, you can learn how to leap into your day. Now, for some people, they have to get, people will say, well, they have to go, that's it, never again. I'm not going to let somebody tell me how to live my life. I'm going to choose myself. So they have to get to that threshold where they go, you can't tell me what I can do. I will tell you what I can do. And it sounds like maybe in your father's case, particularly, that the impetus for changing came about when somebody said, go live in a laboratory, forget the rest of it. And he went, no, that's not going to happen. And Frank, it sounds like he just understood that, he was shy and if he wants, they both seem of the same kind of mindset. If you want to get ahead, you need to change some certain things in your life. And they were willing to do that. It's true, not everybody has that motivation. It may have come from their background. It may have come from their conditioning or life experiences. The good news, though, is that anybody can begin to apply that. I think that's what Napoleon Hill has pointed out and other thought leaders from ancient times to modern times of saying, if you want to make a change, you have to change some things, and you have to change your thoughts and your attitudes. You change your feelings and your behaviors. It's something, because if you keep doing what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. Yeah. And Mark is a perfect example of that. I said to Mark, I said, God, what's it like to sell 500 million books? And the most beautiful thing he said, and it's the thing that
no, because boy, he's a hero.
I know, but he said, think Roger Bannister. He said Roger Bannister, did the 4-minute mile, and once he broke that boundary, everybody else could. He said, I am that Roger Bannister. Break that boundary. I've done the 500 million books. Now you go and sell more. I was like, yeah, that is so cool, that, and it's so generous and it's so humble and it's so inspiring, because anyone can learn from that and then grasp that and go, you know what? I've been thinking too low. I'm gonna break that 500 billion books. I'm gonna whatever it is. For some people it might be making an extra $20,000 a year. For other people it might be having the relationship of their dreams. For another person it could be claiming their health back, or so but I think most importantly is that, and you've shared such wonderful examples of the thinking process of your dad and your husband, and how they decided to do it in spite of whatever might have held some other people back.
Well, the Buddhists say attitude is everything. Yeah. And They simply had the attitude, I'm going to do this. And they just plunged forward and did it.
In Travis Air Force Base, back, I think probably in the 80s or 90s, did a study about attitude and predictors for success in terms of health and healing. And they found that attitude was the #1 predictor for success, but it was also the #1 predictor for success in treatment when undergoing medical process. So that, and we know the placebo effect and the nocebo effect, that if you believe something will help you, it's likely that it will. And all medicine is based on the placebo effect. You know, you can't take a medicine or a vitamin without the placebo effect being in operation. The nocebo effect, obviously, is if you think nothing's going to help you, nothing will, or it's not likely. And so they're saying the attitude of the person undergoing treatment is paramount to the success of the outcome of the treatment. So if somebody's facing, a physical challenge, the best thing for them to do is to work on their attitude and to decide, I can be healthy, I can create health, I can feel better, and we'll go through this smoothly. Because to do otherwise isn't really a good option when you think about it.
Well, let me share a really personal story. It's medical. It has to do with my sister, and this goes back to the year 1985. And I'll tell you ahead of time so that nobody's worrying. She's alive and kicking today. But in 1985, she was diagnosed with a particularly awful form of ovarian cancer.
Wow.
By the time they found it, it had grown to the size of a cantaloupe. And the doctor told her and me, because I spoke with the doctor, that by the time it's gotten that big, your chance of survival is 1 in 1,000. But then he told me, even though, it's unusually advanced and unusually large, and by the way, this is the day of the operation.
Wow.
He told me, I have more hope for her than almost any of the rest of my patients because she has such a good attitude about it. Well, I spoke with her. I was the last person that she talked with before she went under the knife. And my sister is my personal hero because of what I'm about to tell you. Here she is facing eternity because, the operation itself is a problem. But the other thing is that 1 chance in 1,000 of surviving, I mean, those are not good. Right. But here are her words. She said, I'm fine. She said, I can't lose because if I die, I've had a better life than I ever bargained for. A husband who loves me, a wonderful, loving family, fabulous career. All I can do is be grateful for what I've been given so far. On the other hand, if I make it, even better. And then there's a little PS to this story. She woke up, tubes coming out of everywhere after the operation. And she told me that the first thing she did was, she saw a nurse hovering over her, and Augusta winked. And I asked her, Augusta, why did you wink at the nurse? And she said, because I couldn't speak, but I figured the nurse would be worrying about me and I could reassure her. Wow. And I'll tell you what I get out of that story. Just incredible, selflessness or freedom of ego. She doesn't know whether she's going to live or die, but she's concerned that the nurse might be worrying and she winks. I mean, how beautiful can you get? But she proved what the doctor said and what you said, that attitude is just so important because she did beat it. It's been, do math in my head, 15, it's 35 years. I don't know if I got that right, but she's been alive and doing well for 35 years, even though she had only 1 chance in 1,000, but she had such a positive, giving, upbeat attitude.
That is just a beautiful story, and it's testimony to the kind of thing that people can do when their attitude is right. Again, I'll just refer to Napoleon Hill. I mean, he has an example in either in Think and Grow Rich or The Laws of Success, where he said, somebody was being wheeled into the operating room. The doctor came out and said, this guy doesn't stand a chance of survival. He's just shutting down. He's going to die. And the guy being wheeled in said, I'll see you when we get done. And he lived. And the doctor came back and said to apparently Hill and said, he is the reason he's alive. His attitude, it's not what we did that saved him. It's that he decided he was going to survive. And I don't fault anybody who doesn't. I mean, obviously there are people who are not as fortunate, but for whatever reason. But this is what the study does show, that your attitude does increase the likelihood of the success in the outcome of a medical procedure, but also in everything you do. And the story that you shared is truly, truly beautiful. And the idea that she would think, I mean, it goes like to your father, and or to your husband. The attitude, the culture that you both apparently were raised around and in, of being selfless, of serving others, of going that extra mile, of thinking about the employee or thinking about the nurse or thinking about the caregiver, instead of just thinking about you, and wanting to give that message and say, I'm cool, I'm good, I'll let you know. I think that's beautiful. That's truly, truly beautiful.
Well, there's no woman I admire more on this planet than my sister, and it stems from that kind of attitude.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's truly, truly, truly beautiful. Attitude is everything. I love it. And attitude's that little thing that makes an incredible difference. And so, and again, it is the kind of thing that, many of us are not born, all of us, and I should say, are probably born with less than glorious programming and conditioning from not only the people who bring us up, but the media, our peers, our friends, the culture at large, the movies, the TV, whatever it is. We get mixed messages all the while we grow up. And go ahead. I'm
thinking you touched the hot button, because I feel that a lot of the media, a lot of the messages that come to us are totally toxic. Yeah. They're not about love. They're not about giving. They're not about seeing the good in others. And to me, the only antidote that I can think of to that is strong, loving families that teach people better values than you're going to get from the media.
That's a very valid point. I think our brains look for trouble in the world as a survival mechanism, and I think the curiosity with the death and destruction as presented in the media. I mean, they go, if it bleeds, it leads. Devastation sells. People are curious if bad things are happening. My son came to me a few years back. He said, it was about 3 or 4 years ago. He said, "You think it's the end of the world, Dad?" And I said, "Well, why do you ask?" And he said, "Well, with all the stuff going on and everything, and the political climate, this and the other thing." I said, "Well, I'd like to point something out. There are far more good people in the world than there are bad. When something like 9/11 happens or somebody's house burns down, people rush. There's first responders. People do what they can to help other people. And this is truly beautiful. And they do it worldwide. It seems to be a part of humans to go to the calamity and to rescue and to help and to aid and to contribute and to be generous." I said, so there are far more good people than bad people, because the ones you hear about are the exceptions. So that's what sells on the news. You're hearing the bad stuff because there's not that many bad things. It just seems like it, because now we have 24/7 news cycles. So all you're hearing is the bad ones. But and the same thing with good weather days. We have far more good weather than we have bad weather. We have far better days.
Analogy.
And he looked at me and said, "Well, I hadn't thought of it that way. But I guess you're right. I mean, I'm sitting outside. It's a gorgeous day, and sure, a hurricane just happened somewhere, or a tropical storm. But again, they're newsworthy because they aren't happening all the time, And so we do. We sadly people fill themselves with too much of the crap and too much of the negativity and either by watching the news or reading the magazines, or even in our movies and our music, and even in our clothing. I mean, our advertisers tell us we smell, we have flaky hair, we've got yellow teeth, there's so, and it's designed to part people with their money so that people buy products, as opposed to propping people up and saying, you know what, you're more than enough, you're good, you're human, and humans are going to have odor and flaky hair and yellow teeth, and it's all totally cool. You deserve to be, so yeah.
Well, I absolutely love hearing what you say, because, with all my heart and soul, and as I used to tell my kids, all my heart and soul and toenails, I agree with what you're saying. And if somebody's feeling down or depressed, one of the things that I might recommend to them is put yourself on a diet for how much news you consume.
Right.
And I have a very specific reason for believing that. And that is, I worked in television for about 8 years. I had a half-hour show, and then I had 3 2-minute shows each week.
Wow.
And that meant they were syndicated, but I worked out of the CBS affiliate in Sacramento. And I was privy to a study that cost $1 million, but that, as far as I can tell, influences programming certainly throughout the country and maybe throughout the world. The study was, what keeps people glued to the TV and not turning the channel? And what they learned was that you might hate what you're watching, but if it's sex or violence, or tragedy, it's very hard for you to turn the channel. I mean, you might be even feeling ill, but you have to keep watching. You're glued to it. And so a lot of programming is based on the fact that if it's going to make you feel all wound up or fearful or panicked or awful in one way or another, it's almost irresistible. So they want you to watch so that they can sell product, but that's not your interest. Your interest is to have a whole integrated together life, and that it's not valuable for you to play into their desire to get you hooked with all the bad news. So put yourself in a diet. No more than 15 minutes a day of news. And I'm getting to where I'm embarrassed to tell you. I'm embarrassed to tell you that I hardly turn the TV on. I do read some newspapers, and if something big's going on, I'll turn on the TV. But I'm happier without being bombarded endlessly by stuff that brings you down.
No, your point is so well taken. People have to learn to manage their mindset. And the problem with most people is they don't. They just live haphazardly. They live by default. They have the TV on in the background. They have music. They wear designer clothing with other people's brands. So they're paid billboards. I mean, they paid to be a billboard, a walking billboard for products and things like that.
I need to jump in if you'll forgive me. I want to jump in, and I'm asking forgiveness ahead of time.
Well, please.
The Hendersons and the Perdues brought up children, and the family culture is, to my mind, astonishingly similar. But among the things that I find in both families is, I hope I don't make enemies for saying this, but we were not big on wearing designer clothes. We weren't big on consumption. In both families, you win points and you feel important for serving others, not for how much you spend. And to this day, my relatives, both Hendersons and Perdues, almost consistently travel like economy class. I went first class yesterday, maybe for the first time in forever, and I only did it. I was going from Baltimore to Dallas, and I only went first class because, to my astonishment, the plane was full, and that was the tickets I could get. But wow. Normally, I go economy. I use the subways. My ego does not need going around in Rolls Royces or flying private jets or even going first class.
It is so amazing.
I have to keep an eye on the time.
No, you got the point.
A few minutes left.
So let me say this. 2 things. One is, before we go, stellar points and stellar conversation. And I hope you'll come back and be a guest again so that we can continue.
I'll do everything too, because I've loved this. I figure that you such a bald-faced admission, but I figure that you're bringing out the best in me. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Well, and let me reciprocate and say thank you so much. And likewise, I'm enjoying our conversation. And I hope that people are listening, and when they do, that they apply what you said. And I would love to come back and talk more about the family culture, because raising children in this day and age, I think there's so much to be said. I'm going to say something that's probably very provocative, and I don't want to, but I think psychology has truly harmed the world in many, many ways, and it's not just psychology, it's the reports of it. Because every day you get a different report about some study, but you don't get the overall picture of what these studies embody. So sometimes you get coffee's good one day and coffee's bad the next day, but coffee with cream is good or bad. And so nobody ever knows what to do and then people are coddled and they're told how to raise their children or not raise their children, or they should be, and I think what's truly important is to live and to find out and to ask examples from those people who have successfully raised families. What are you doing that works, and what did you embody and what did you embrace that resulted in the family connecting and giving and being together and successful lives, as opposed to reading studies about it. And you know what I mean? It goes back to the news reports of stuff, as opposed to the actual experience of connecting with people like yourself who have true value to share.
Well, almost as a hobby, I love to read about how reliable. I mean, I'm all for science, but how often the studies aren't replicable, right? And especially the psychology ones. And then one that really bothers me no end, which is, do you remember that in the 80s and the 90s, the food pyramid was encouraging us to eat all sorts of carbohydrates and kind of low on fruits and vegetables? I have a very strong suspicion, and I think a lot of people share this, that our obesity epidemic happened to coincide with the food pyramid recommendations. So, even if a lot of people say it's true, it may not be. So I'm with you. I think I'd rather have personal experience that works than the latest fad study.
Well, and what you said about, we will have to come back and talk about these things, but what you said about nutrition and I mean, they have given us so much bogus information, and just getting truth in labeling and things like that is almost impossible these days, and finding out what's in our food. That the dairy is not one of the 5 food groups either, that apparently the dairy industry lobbied to be considered one of the 5 food groups so that they could sell milk in school. It was all about increasing our profits, not because it's actually good for you or bad for you. It was about, hey, we can share more milk if we're one of the 5 food groups. Because there are cultures in the world who do not drink animal products. And they're doing just fine. So, getting accurate information and living a successful life, and having personal examples like yourself, your father, your husband, and your family are truly what we can use far more of, and should seek out and learn. Sit at the feet of masters and in the way they used to transmit, and learn and imbibe. So thank you. I really do appreciate that.
Well, I've loved being on, and I'm just looking at the clock, and I gotta go. I'd stay all day and all night, but I'm a big believer in being conscientious, and if so, I have to say goodbye.
You have to say goodbye. So say goodbye. Keep your commitment, because that's important, and I appreciate that. And we will talk later, and we will have you on again. And I really appreciate it. This is Mitzie Perdue. Thank you so much for being here today.
It's been a joy sharing time with you and your audience.
Thank you, Mitzie. Have a great day, and best wishes with all that you do. And we'll talk soon. Thank you, everybody, for watching. You're watching Create Your Best Life with Rex, and my guest, Mitzie Perdue, at MitziePerdue.com. That's it, everybody. You've been watching Create Your Best Life with Rex. I hope you will apply the powerful principles and practices you've learned in today's show. And also click the links below to go to my website and my guests. There's powerful programs, principles, and practices waiting for you when you click those links. Do it today and create your best life ever.